Once in a while we get to do it, and I wanted to do it before we get into the bill. And so I would ask the Chair exactly what time, Madam President, do we go back to the bill?
2.5 minutes.
In 2.5 minutes. So I would say that I will then speak more then about the bill because we have some amendments. And could you advise me, if you would, Madam President, what the order of votes are today on this transportation bill?
First amendment is Corker, number 1810. Next, Carper, number 1670. Hutchinson, 1568. McCain, 1669. Alexander, 1779. Boxer, 1816. Paul, 1556. And Shaheen, 1678.
I just want to thank the President for this because I wanted members to know. Now, it's very likely that several of these will not require votes, but I think we will expect at least between, I'd say, 3 and 5 votes. I think that's a fair indication of where we're going. So I will be back to discuss those amendments at the proper time. I thank you. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator Merkley.
I ask unanimous consent that my intern, Andy Hackbarth, be allowed privileges of the floor for the balance of the day.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I rise today to speak to the Senate's constitutional responsibility to advise and consent on judicial nominations. Throughout the history of the United States, senators from both sides of this aisle have taken that duty very seriously, because if they do not honor that duty, the judiciary does not function. Think of it this way. We talk about the 3 branches of government, but in no possible way did the writers of our Constitution envision that the Senate could use the advise and consent power to undermine the ability of the other 2 branches to do their jobs.
And,
yes, Madam President.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-1813, which the clerk will report. Under the previous order, the time until 11:30 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees. Under the previous order, until 11:30 a.m., the time will be equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees.
Calendar number 311, S-1813, a bill to reauthorize federal aid highway and highway safety construction programs and for other purposes.
Madam President.
Senator Morgan.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. And I'm rising today to speak about the Senate's constitutional duty to advise and consent on judicial nominations. This power is enormously important. And in no way did the founders of our nation, the writers of our Constitution, envision that this body would use their power to advise and consent as a method of undermining the ability of the other two branches to perform their responsibilities. Indeed, throughout the history of the United States, senators from both sides of the aisle have taken this responsibility of advice and consent very seriously. This duty requires us to put aside ideology and partisanship, because otherwise our constituents, due to our inaction, would be unable to obtain the speedy and public trial that is supposed to be their birthright as Americans. Americans aren't thinking of their district courts in terms of red courts and blue courts. They're not thinking of their circuit courts in terms of red courts and blue courts. No, they're thinking about Lady Justice. They're thinking about justice being delivered in an even-handed and swift manner. And when they see the obstruction of the judiciary that is emanating from the Senate, they're frustrated. They're frustrated, and they recognize that judiciary, when it's damaged and justices unappointed, that indeed that means delay for cases, and that means that their right to a speedy trial is taken away. And they're thinking about the chaos that results when a case remains in limbo for too long. So why, in the past few years, have we allowed partisanship to overtake our duty to maintain a functional judiciary? Simply put, what has happened is some senators in this body, motivated by misguided notions of partisan warfare, have decided to abuse the supermajority power of this chamber in order to undermine the judiciary. Now, this bears little resemblance to the Senate of 1976 when I first came here as an intern, when the power of the supermajority was recognized as an exceptional act of conscience to be used only under the most enormous issues. Enormous issues, when you were willing to stand on the floor of the Senate and make your case before the American people as to why the simple majority envisioned in the Constitution for this body to act should be obstructed. But now what we see is folks exercising their power to obstruct a simple majority and not coming to the floor to defend their position. They're afraid of the public reaction to their obstruction of this body because they know the public expects us to be responsible in reviewing and voting on nominees for the executive branch and for the judiciary. The Senate of 1976 would never have entertained the idea that well-qualified nominees would be routinely subjected to filibusters. And indeed, even throughout most of the last decade, this has not been the case. So imagine my surprise when I came here as a new senator in 2009, revisiting the chamber that I came to as a youth back in 1976, and I discovered that the two Senates bore little resemblance to each other, that the reasonably responsive, bipartisan, collaborative body of 1976 had been replaced by a group now paralyzed by the abuse of the filibuster and the supermajority. Instead of debate and deliberation, followed by up and down votes, senators have been even blocking the motion to proceed. In other words, blocking the ability to debate whether to get to a bill to debate an issue. 2 levels removed from actual discussion and decision-making. And in contrast to the image that Americans have of a filibuster in which Jimmy Stewart comes here to Washington, and he comes down to the well of the Senate, and he carries on his fight and his argument in front of the American people until he collapses of exhaustion. Now the senators of filibuster hide from the American people. They object to the simple majority and go off and have a fancy wine dinner while American justice remains unfulfilled. And that's just not right. There has been egregious abuse of the filibuster across all areas, but is particularly destructive in regards to judges. That is because we are often talking about judges who everyone agrees are well qualified, judges who pass out of committee unanimously, judges who, when they reach a final vote, pass this chamber with 80 or 90 or 95 members saying, yes, that person is the right person to fill that judicial vacancy. Why on earth are we dragging our feet on these nominees when we have courts in crisis? Lest my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think we are simply raising this now because we're in the majority and they're in the minority, let's revisit the point in 2004, the exact same point into the administration of George W. Bush that we are now into this administration. Here is a chart that compares those two administrations. We have both the circuit court and the district court. So, this far into the administration of George W. Bush, the time that it took to go from committee to being confirmed, 29 days. The time now, 131 days for a circuit court nominee, and getting longer with every delay that we have. And the district court, this time in the Bush administration, 22 days to go from committee to confirmation. And now, under the dysfunction of our current Senate, under the abuse of this current Senate, 93 days. Now, if these bars were reversed, my colleagues would come to the floor and say, look what a good job we did previously, and what a terrible job is being done now. And I would agree with them, that we have to be able to get folks up, and we have to be able to vote. We need to work together to change this situation, because the result of these delays mean that there are more and more vacancies and more judicial emergencies, where it's been declared that those vacancies are having an emergency impact on the function of judiciary. Let's take a look at that issue. Okay, here we have judicial vacancies in recent presidencies. In March 1996, 53 vacancies, so that far into one administration. In March 2004, 47 vacancies under Bush. And now here we are, 84 vacancies in district and circuit courts. So virtually a doubling of those vacant positions that are preventing speedy and responsive trials across our nation. This is why our Chief Justice has declared that there is a judicial emergency in our country, that justice delayed is justice denied, that we, the Senate, must do a better job of fulfilling our responsibilities under the Constitution. Now, in many cases, the home state senators for a particular circuit court or district court nominee, they've done their job. They vetted the candidates, they forwarded nominees, the administration has picked one of them. Often this is a bipartisan deliberation. And yet, here we are, even after the cleared Judiciary Committee, normally in bipartisan fashion, here we are, paralyzed on the floor of the Senate. So we have no one else to blame. We can't blame the home state senators. We can't blame the Judiciary Committee. It's only the floor of this chamber that is the obstruction, that is basically taking an arrow and aiming at the heart of justice across this nation. It is time for this body to do our job, and it's time for these nominees to be voted on here on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And it's time to fill those vacancies and put justice in place in order to fulfill our responsibility to advise and consent, and to fulfill the judiciary's responsibility to provide justice across our nation. Thank you, Madam President. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
senator from New York. Without objection.
I ask that I may speak as if in morning business for the time I may consume.
Without objection.
I am honored to offer my support for the nomination of Ronnie Abrams to the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. I also want to thank President Obama for acting on my recommendation and nominating another superbly qualified female jurist to the federal bench. I have had the privilege of knowing Ronnie for many years. I know her as a fair-minded woman of great integrity. Throughout her distinguished legal career, she's proven herself as an exceptional attorney. As the Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, she supervised 160 prosecutions of violent crime, organized crime, white-collar crime, public corruption, drug trafficking, and computer crime. She helped shape the policy and management of the U.S. Attorney's Office, guiding its success in a broad range of high-level, high-stakes cases. Her record shows her commitment to justice. And I can tell you, she has a deep and sincere commitment to public service. There's no question that Ms. Abrams is extremely well qualified and well suited to serve on the federal judiciary. I strongly believe that this country needs women like her serving in the federal judiciary, an institution that I believe needs more exceptional women. Ronnie Abrams received bipartisan support among the Senate Judiciary Committee members, yet because of the political games we have today, she's waited more than 227 days to be confirmed. As my colleague from Oregon pointed out, that's far, far longer than any nominee had been receiving under the George Bush administration. I've traveled all across New York State at event after event, urging more women to enter public service. I'm encouraged that women now make up nearly half of all our law students and about 30% of the federal bench. For the first time in history, women also represent nearly one-third of the seats on the trial courts, Court of Appeals, and after the confirmation of Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, the highest court in land, the Supreme Court. The Obama administration has taken significant steps towards maintaining and indeed increasing the representation of women in the federal judiciary. 47% of President Obama's confirmed nominees have been women, compared to only 22% of the judges confirmed under his predecessor. While it's true that women have a long way in filling the ranks of the legal world, we still have a long way to go to achieve equality and a federal bench that is truly reflective of the American people. And I believe it's incredibly important that we do reach that point of equality, because it can bring us closer to full equality and justice throughout our legal system and throughout our nation. Not only is Ms. Abrams an exceptional jurist, there's no doubt that having Ms. Abrams serving on the federal judiciary will bring us closer to that goal. I ask my Republican colleagues to come together now around this shared value that we believe as a nation, as a body, that everyone deserves justice. We have to work together now because, as it stands, there's not enough judges right now to do the work that our overloaded courts need them to do. We have to be able to hand down justice in a timely manner. Former Attorney General to President George W. Bush, Michael Mukasey, recently remarked that the civil litigation system has ground to a halt. That is not the kind of system the American people deserve, and we cannot let partisan politics and political bickering get in the way of allowing our judicial system to function properly. I recommend Ms. Abrams because of her dedication to the law, her commitment to fairness, and her ability to serve the people of the great state of New York with dignity and integrity. I have been very honored to recommend her for this position, and I urge my colleagues to move forward to support her confirmation. Thank you, Mr. President.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Acosta.
The senator from Kentucky.
I would like to call up Amendment 1556.
We are under a quorum call.
I'd ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
I would also like to ask unanimous consent to call up Amendment 1556.
Support. The Senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, proposes amendment number 1556.
I'd ask unanimous consent that we dispense with the reading of the amendment. The question I have for the Senate is, has your government gotten out of control? Have the regulators become so numerous and so zealous that we can't even carry on the ordinary affairs of our government? This amendment would allow, if a bridge is made impassable, we recently had a bridge where a boat ran into the bridge in Kentucky and you can no longer cross the bridge because it's not there. We have to wait for environmental regulations and environmental studies, which sometimes can be 4 and 5 years before we can repair our bridges and our roads during an emergency. This is crazy. This goes on even in regular affairs, such as trying to replace a sewage plant in our state or throughout the United States. Do we really want to live in a country where we have to stop and count how many barnacles are on your bridge before you decide whether to rebuild the bridge? Do we want to stop and count how many mussels are attached to the pier before we rebuild our bridge? In the end, we're going to rebuild the bridge anyway, but we spend a year's time or more wasted on these studies that in the end we're going to rebuild the bridge. I'll give you an example. We have a small town in Kentucky that has a sewage plant, and the population of the town has outgrown the sewage plant. When it rains, the raw sewage goes into the river. Now, I don't know any Republican or Democrat wants raw sewage in the river, so we need a new sewage plant in the town. But you know what? What does the EPA say? They want to count the mussels. They want to count the mussels in the river, and then they want to estimate, will there be more mussels or less mussels after you build a new sewage plant? Well, guess what? When you build a new sewage plant, the raw sewage won't go in the river, which is what we all intend, and in the end, it's what will all happen. But in the meantime, we waste time and money. This small town of like 300 people is going to have to spend $100,000 on an EPA study to hire someone to count the mussels. While they're counting the mussels, they're going to have to count the Indian artifacts if someone can look for a broken Indian arrowhead, which will delay the project maybe indefinitely. We've just gone crazy as a country with these regulators. We all want some rules. We don't want anyone to pollute your neighbor's property. But the EPA is out of control. What we need to do is, in emergencies or urgencies, when a bridge collapses or a roadway is washed away, we don't need to spend a year or 2 or 4 or 5 years doing an EPA study, which basically enriches some contractor who counts the mussels. We don't need to be counting the mussels in the stream. We need to get to repairing the bridge, which we're going to do anyway. We're just going to waste a year counting the mussels and paying some contractor $100,000 a year. So this amendment would allow states to opt out. Well, we have a problem. You know, the bridge that we have out in Kentucky has 2 communities. Many people live in one community and have to drive to the other community. They can't get there because of the bridge. We want to wait a year to count how many barnacles are on the bridge. This is a common sense resolution and should pass. But I'll tell you the way Washington works. The other side doesn't want my amendment to pass, even though it has common sense, so they're going to offer an alternative. Their alternative is say something but do nothing. It's called a sense of the Senate resolution. They will proudly proclaim that we need to make it better and please, Mr. Regulator, make it better, but they won't change the law. Mine would actually change the law to allow you to start rebuilding your bridge or repairing your road almost immediately in the same location, free of the government regulations. We need to do this at all levels. This is a very small incremental step forward. It's something we should all agree on. And if you watch the vote later on today, you'll find out that we don't all agree. And instead, the other side's going to say something, do nothing. So this is something we need to, as a society, get started on because we're being killed by regulations. This is one small step on something that should be bipartisan. There are many more steps that need to be taken because throughout our country, millions of jobs are being lost from overzealous regulators. Millions of people's privacy and private property rights are being invaded by these regulators. And this is a very small incremental stop of the encroachment of these regulators, and I urge support of my amendment 1556. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Clerk will call the roll.
Friend, withdraw the request. Quorum call.
Does the senator withdraw his request for a quorum call?
Yes.
Senator
Thank you very much.
California.
First of all, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to call up Boxer Amendment 1816. I ask that the clerk report the amendment by number.
Without objection, the clerk will report the amendment by number.
The senator from California, Mrs. Boxer, proposes an amendment numbered 1816.
Mr. President, I just have to say that Senator Paul's amendment is a broad overreach that would endanger the health and safety of the people that you represent, that I represent, and every senator represents. And what I have is essentially a side-by-side amendment that encourages and tells the agencies the Senate supports a very speedy process which is already in the law to review and approve health and environmental protections when we have to rebuild. You know, the current law is flexible. If you look at the reconstruction of the bridge in Minnesota, everybody knew what happened there. It collapsed in August '07, and the bridge was completely replaced by September '08. Without these draconian types of measures that my friend put forward. In other words, he's looking for a problem. The fact of the matter is we were able to see that bridge rebuilt in a year. That's amazing. And no environmental laws were waived. People just worked and made sure that they all were expedited. So there's a difference between expediting a review, which we support. As a matter of fact, the underlying bill is very strong on that. We expedite reviews without giving up anything for the people. They can still make sure their rights are protected. Let's say a highway is washed away in a flood. If you were to follow Senator Paul's advice on his amendment, you would virtually have no studies to take a look at whether it makes more sense to rebuild it perhaps just a few feet away from where it washed out. It might avoid then the cascade of water that washed it away in the first place. You may have a situation where you're rebuilding a bridge, and as you put the foundation in, you find out through these studies, because they perhaps never were done before, these bridges are old, that there's a drinking water aquifer right below there. So if you move that a few feet, you resolve the problem. What is the point in not having information and making a huge mistake and rebuilding? We had a situation right here from an earthquake where we learned so much after the bridge collapsed that if we use different materials, for example, it would withstand the and the next earthquake better. We do have earthquakes all the time, unfortunately, in our great state of California. So it's an overreach. It's radical. You don't want to waive all the protective laws that protect the drinking water of our people, that protect the environment. So I hope that we will vote against the Paul amendment. I think it's very important to do that, and support my amendment, which basically is very clear and tells agencies they should use the most efficient and speedy process under the law to review and approve health and environmental protections. The bottom line here is that our underlying bill already includes significant bipartisan reforms that will ensure accelerated project delivery, including limiting the number of steps needed to clear a project for construction, easy and early coordination between agencies to avoid delays, incentives for accelerating the project delivery decisions. 1556, this amendment by Rand Paul, walks away from this bipartisan approach. It launches a sweeping attack on federal and state health and environmental safeguards. You know, when you need to rebuild a project, and it involves toxic materials like lead and asbestos, they have to be handled and disposed of properly to protect public health. Waiving all these federal and state reviews and approvals endangers our people, and I hope we will vote no against Amendment 1816. I'm sorry, that we will vote no on Amendment 1556 and yes on Amendment 1816. I thank my friend, and I would note the absence of the... One moment. Madam President, I have 9 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session for the Senate. They have the approval of majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to,
Without
and that
objection.
these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
quorum call on the floor of the Senate as senators continue working on transportation programs and projects. Shortly, they'll begin votes on the 3 remaining amendments to the bill, actually 3 amendments, followed by a vote on final passage. So there'll be a total of 3 votes coming up on the bill. A little bit later today, the Senate will consider the first of 17 judicial nominations. They're expected to take procedural votes on those nominations this afternoon. Also, we've learned that Senate Democrats have dropped plans to move their own legislation easing securities regulations for small businesses as part of an effort to encourage job creation. In agreeing to take up the House's bill, Majority Leader Reid is likely to see a quick final passage here in the Senate. Congress continues looking for bills that indicate a work toward promoting business growth and jobs. And according to CQ, Majority Leader Reid said yesterday that the Senate would vote on the House bill, which is touted by supporters as a jobs measure, rather than taking up their Democratic alternative. And he said earlier the Senate would consider. The House last week passed the bill intended to ease access to capital for small businesses and allow them to more easily launch initial public offerings with broad bipartisan support, and President Obama has said that he would sign it into law.
Madam President.
From Texas,
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
without objection.
Madam President, I am not going to call up my amendment that would limit the tolling of federal highways to the 3 that have been applied for and tentatively approved by the Department of Transportation, much because Senator Carper and I have talked, and his amendment, which would have expanded that, is also offered but is not going to be considered. Mine also was offered but is not going to be considered. And here is the point, though, Madam President. It is time that we have a real discussion and a debate about having tolling that would cover all of the free lanes of our federal highway system be able to be allowed by any state or any entity of government. We need to bring this out, and I would ask the senators who are the chairman and ranking members of the committee to have a hearing, and let's talk about this, because I believe that when President Eisenhower said we need a national highway system for national security, that was his major purpose, but it has also clearly been a huge help for commerce and the ease of commerce and travel among our states. He never envisioned that a state would then put up tolls across an entire federal highway and make the taxpayers who have paid for 50 years to build these highways, many of which are not in their states, pay then again to use the highways that they have built with the vision of President Eisenhower to have a system for national defense, connectivity, and commerce. So I'm not going to offer and withdraw my amendment, and Senator Carper is not going to offer his amendment that would expand this type of option. But I do think, Madam President, that it is essential that we have a policy that our highways that have been built for 50 years to give us the vision that President Eisenhower had of a national highway system, the understanding that we've completed it. The skeleton has been completed. And now it's time to look in a different way at these highways. Number one, a toll on one lane that adds a new free lane. I agree with that. That's fine. So that as long as you have the same number of free lanes for the people of the United States who have paid for this and the truckers in the United States who are using these, as long as you have that concept, I'm fine with tolling to add. But, Madam President, to take all of the free lanes or most of the free lanes and say, and we're going to scrunch up the truckers and the taxpayers who have used these freeways and built them, is wrong. And I think we should have a policy against it. And I hope, and I see that the distinguished chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee is here, Senator Boxer. I would just ask that as we move through this, and I do hope that we have this 2-year bill, and I commend the chairman and the ranking member, Senator Inhofe, for a 2-year bill that does keep our infrastructure going. But I would hope that in the future, as you are beginning the consideration of a long-term bill, that we would have a discussion that, number one, would have a policy of this country that we're not going to clog the freeways that have been built by America with toll lanes to make Americans pay again. That would be number one. And number two, that we would open up the possibility that states that are donor states that are giving their hard-earned tax dollars to other states that now have the same capacity to build out, that they would have the ability to opt out except for the maintenance of these freeways and use their transportation dollars for their needs. Because we are a fast-growing state, as is the state of California, We need our highway dollars for our own priorities, and I think that should be considered in the future. So with that, Madam President, I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
From Vermont.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with the chairperson of the Environmental and Public Works Committee, Senator Boxer.
Without objection.
Madam President, I would like to congratulate Chairman Boxer and Ranking Member Inhofe for all of their hard work on this very important bill. This legislation is a major step forward toward addressing the significant infrastructure needs of our country and creating desperately needed jobs. I appreciate the inclusion of an amendment I offered which increases the federal cost share for emergency relief permanent repairs in extreme disasters. My intent is that the provision will apply to all open disasters as of the date of enactment of this bill. Is this the Chairman's understanding as well?
I want to say to the Senator of Vermont, first of all, thank you for all your hard work in the Environment and Public Works Committee. You focused on jobs like a laser beam, and yes, you are correct. The intent is that this provision would apply to all open disasters, which would include the states that were pummeled by Hurricane Irene last year.
With that, I want to thank the Chairman very much for her hard work and for her success. Thank you very much.
Madam President,
Senator from California.
I ask consent that McCain Amendment number 1669 as modified be withdrawn, and the Shaheen Amendment number 1678 no longer be in order, as these issues were resolved in the manager's package last evening.
Without objection.
Further, that the Carper Amendment number 1670 and the Hutchison Amendment number 1568 no longer be in order, as they no longer intend to offer these amendments. And finally, that there be 2 minutes equally divided prior to each vote, and all after the first vote be 10-minute votes.
Without objection.
Madam President, could I ask what the amendment is that is now pending before the body?
Under the previous order, the question is on Amendment 1810.
I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection. The question is on Amendment number 1810. If there's no further debate, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Under the previous order, there's now 2 minutes of debate, equally divided, on Amendment number 1816. Excuse me, 1779.
Call time.
Without objection. There's no further debate. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is agreed to. There are now 2 minutes of debate on Amendment number 1860. 1816.
Madam President, I just want to ask if it's possible by unanimous consent that Senator Carper could have 2 minutes to discuss an issue that Senator Hutchison addressed before. If my colleagues are okay, we could take a break from the voting.
Without objection.
Thank you. I would yield to my friend.
Chair, thank you very much. I just want to say before I say anything else, thank you. Thanks to you, heartfelt thanks to you and Senator Inhofe, to the members of your staffs and to our staffs for, I think, just a job very well done. And we're proud of you, and in a place where not a whole lot gets done down here some days, this is good stuff.
Thank you, Tom.
So thank you. I want to take a minute or so today, Madam President, to talk about an amendment that I filed to this legislation along with Senators Kirk and Senator Warner, to whom I offer my sincere thanks, as well as to a whole lot of organizations around the country who have supported this legislation. As you may know, under current law, a small number of states around our country now enjoy the flexibility to implement tolls on interstate highways. Under the amendment that we filed, some additional states could choose to apply for that same flexibility. States would only or could only use toll revenues, a type of user fee, to pay for additional transportation investments along those roads that are actually being tolled. In Delaware and a handful of other states, interstate toll revenue is an important part of our state's transportation budget. Senators Kirk, Warner, and I believe that other states should have the same option available to them. However, in an effort to move this critical transportation legislation forward, Senator Hutchinson and I have both agreed not to offer our competing amendments on this subject to the bill. That being said, I filed this amendment, Madam President, in part because Congress needs to face the facts when it comes to transportation funding and declining gas tax revenues. We're using less gas. We have more energy-efficient vehicles. The cost of roads, highways, bridges, and transit continues to go up, and we need to be able to pay for them. We can't just borrow money from around the world to do this kind of thing. If we want to pass another transportation bill when this legislation that we're debating does expire in 2 years, we must address structural flaws in the Highway Trust Fund that are making long-term investments nearly impossible. And I hope our respective amendments, they're at odds with one another, but I hope that they represent the beginning of an honest and important conversation about our nation's long-term transportation needs and how we pay for them in a fiscally responsible way. And with that, I'm pleased to yield the floor to whoever seeks recognition.
Of debate equally divided prior to a vote in relation to amendment number 1816 offered by the Senator from California, Mrs. Boxer.
Very much, Madam
Senator
President.
from California.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have two choices on how to handle rebuilding of infrastructure, maintaining infrastructure, whether it occurs after an emergency or is just in the stream of regular maintenance. Now, what we have done in this bill is extraordinary, and I think everyone would admit we have speeded up approval process for all construction here in the underlying bill. Now, this was a hot issue. Senator Inhofe and I were coming from different places, but we reached strong agreement, and what we say in our amendment number 1816 is we encourage and support what we've done in the underlying bill and telling the agencies that after a disaster to move as fast as they can while protecting the people. Now, what Senator Paul does in his amendment, it doesn't apply even to after a disaster. It's any time. So you could be fixing any problem that involves the most toxic materials and all the laws are waived. It is an overreach. It is radical. I would urge an aye vote on the Boxer amendment and a no vote on the Paul amendment.
Who yields time in opposition?
Madam President.
Senator from Kentucky.
We have a bridge out between Marshall County and Trigg County. It takes an hour to go around the lake. What we're asking for is an exemption from onerous and overzealous federal regulations that can slow the process of rebuilding a bridge or a road by years. The average time for an environmental review for a construction project is 4 years. Now, the other side wants to pay lip service. They want to say something about it, but do nothing to fix the problem. The people who live in Marshall County and Trigg County want their bridge fixed. They want to get to work and not take an hour and a half to get to work. The way we fix this is we get rid of the red tape. The way you do that is by changing the law. So what I propose is that we vote against the say something, do nothing, and vote for a reform that actually has teeth and would take away the red tape and allow us to immediately begin to repair our bridges without Big Brother obstructing the reconstruction. Thank you, and I yield back.
Is there sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bacchus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. DeMint, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson, South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Mrs. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mr. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall, Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators having voted in the affirmative: Begich, Boxer, Cantwell, Gillibrand, Inouye, Murray, Nelson of Nebraska, Pryor, Warner. Senators having voted in the negative: Kyle, Wicker, Paul. Senator Paul. Senator Paul, no. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans, no. Mrs. Hutchison. Mrs. Hutchison, aye.
This is ridiculous. And then I turned it on. We were like halfway through it. So.
Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. DeMint. Mr. DeMint, no. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Lugar, no. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Vitter, aye. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Bacchus. Mr. Bacchus, aye. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Begich. Mr. Begich, aye. Mr. Moran. No. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, no. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, no. Mr. Franken. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin. Aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley. Aye. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Coburn. Aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins. Aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin. Aye. Ms. Snow. Ms. Snow. Aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Mikulski. Aye. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman. Aye. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman. Aye. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley. No. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin. Aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller. Aye. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran. Aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell. No. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez. Aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin. Aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow. Aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb. Aye. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte. Aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts. No. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Isaacson. Aye. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss. Aye. Ms. Hagan. Ms. Hagan. Aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman. Aye. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby. Aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham. Aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Aye. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio. Aye. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad. Aye. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates. No. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi. Aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. No. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander. No. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, no. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye.